The Elves and the Shoemaker, illustrated by Gail Uriel. Once upon a time, a shoemaker lived with his wife above his workshop. The shoemaker was a good man, and he worked hard, but he was very poor. The day came where he had only enough leather to make one pair of shoes. "I will be able to make a better pair of shoes after I've had a good night's sleep," he told his wife as they went upstairs. The next morning, bright and early, the shoemaker went downstairs. What a surprise he had! On his workbench, where the leather had been, there was a brand new pair of shoes. They were neatly and perfectly made, with not a stitch out of place. "These shoes are masterpieces," the shoemaker exclaimed to his wife. He put them in the window, hoping someone would come and buy them. Sure enough, a finely dressed young man soon entered the workshop to try on the shoes. They fitted perfectly, and they were so handsome that the man paid a high price for them happily. With the money, the shoemaker was able to buy enough leather to make 2 new pairs of shoes. By the time he returned to his shop, he was tired, so he cut out the leather and left it on his workbench. Then he went upstairs to bed. The next morning, the shoemaker had another surprise. There on the workbench were 2 new pairs of shoes. They were even more beautiful than the first pair and were just as perfectly made. The shoemaker put them in the window, and before lunchtime he had sold both pairs for a good price. Now he had enough money to buy leather for 4 pairs of shoes. Once again, he cut out the leather, left it on his workbench, and went upstairs to bed. And once again, when he came downstairs the next morning to find beautiful shoes all made up and stitched perfectly. The same thing happened every day for weeks. The shoemaker and his wife were not poor anymore. "These shoes have been appearing as if it was by magic," the shoemaker said to his wife. "But someone must have made them. Who do you think it could be?" "Let's sit up tonight and watch," his wife suggested. "Maybe we can find out." So that night the shoemaker left some leather, all cut out and ready to sew, on his workbench as usual. Then, instead of going to bed, he and his wife hid behind a curtain at the back of the shop, where they waited and waited and waited. The shoemaker and his wife were just about to go to bed when at the stroke of midnight the shop door opened and in danced 2 tiny elves. They skipped up to the workbench and quickly began sewing the leather into fine new shoes. As they worked they sang, "We will sew and we will stitch to help the shoemaker get rich." Soon the shoes were finished and little elves leapt out of the workbench and danced out to the shop. "Those kind elves have helped us," said the shoemaker, astonished. "We must repay them." "Did you see how thin their clothes were?" his wife asked. "And their little feet were bare. Those poor little men must be freezing." "Let's make some warm clothes for the elves to show how grateful we are," said the shoemaker. The next day the shoemaker's wife knitted 2 cozy woolen jackets, 2 tiny scarves, and 2 pairs of warm pants. The shoemaker used his finest leather to make 2 little pairs of boots. That night, instead of leaving the leather on his workbench, the shoemaker left the clothes all wrapped up in a shiny paper and ribbons. Then he and his wife hid behind the curtain to wait. At the stroke of midnight, the shop door opened, and in came the little elves. They hopped up on the workbench and saw the presents that had been left for them. They opened the parcels at once. In the twinkling of an eye, they had dressed into brand new clothes. They knew that the presents were the shoemaker's way of saying thank you, and they did a happy dance once together, singing, "Now the shoemaker's grown rich, there's no need to sew and stitch." Then he hopped off the workbench and scurried out the door. The shoemaker and his wife never saw the little elves again, but their troubles were over, and they had a good and long happy life for many years. The end.